The bride's hands were still trembling when the driver grabbed her wrist. "Hide in the trunk. Now." His voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Camille Ashford, in her $40,000 gown, stared at Wesley Crane, the man who had driven her family for 3 years without ever speaking more than necessary. Behind the estate, 500 guests waited. The orchestra had already begun. But Wesley's eyes held something she had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. She didn't ask why. She climbed into the darkness, satin crushing against metal, the smell of motor oil mixing with her French perfume. Then she heard it. Her fiancé's voice, and another woman's laugh. What Camille discovered in that trunk would shatter everything she believed about love, loyalty, and the people she had overlooked her entire life. 6 hours earlier, the Ashford estate had been a symphony of controlled chaos. Florists adjusted white roses in crystal vases, while caterers arranged champagne towers that caught the morning light. In the bridal suite on the 3rd floor, Camille stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, watching 2 assistants fasten the last buttons on her Vera Wang gown. The dress weighed nearly 15 pounds, a cascade of hand-sewn pearls and imported French lace that had taken 7 months to create. She had chosen every detail herself, from the exact shade of ivory to the placement of each crystal bead. This was not just a wedding. This was a merger, an event that would be photographed for 3 different magazines and discussed in financial circles for months. Preston Hale, her fiancé, was the rising star of East Coast investment banking. And together, they would become the power couple everyone expected them to be. Her phone buzzed on the vanity table, a text from Preston. "Can't wait to see you walk down that aisle. Today changes everything." Camille smiled, but something flickered in her chest, a feeling she quickly dismissed. She had learned long ago to trust logic over instinct. Instinct was for people who couldn't afford certainty. She had built a tech empire worth $2 billion by the age of 38. She didn't make mistakes. Her reflection stared back at her, perfect and composed, and she reminded herself that this was exactly what she wanted. Love was a strategic decision, and Preston was the perfect choice. He understood ambition. He matched her energy. He never demanded more than she could give. That was enough. That had to be enough. The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had everything figured out, and Camille had spent her entire adult life making sure that image never cracked. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her wedding coordinator, a nervous woman named Patricia, poked her head through the door. "Ms. Ashford, there's a small issue with the seating arrangement. Table 14 has a conflict." Camille sighed. Table 14 was where she had placed her former business partner and his new wife, directly across from the investor who had backed her out of spite 3 years ago. She had done it intentionally, a subtle power play that amused her. "Leave it," she said. "They'll survive." Patricia nodded and disappeared, her heels clicking rapidly down the hallway, as if she couldn't escape fast enough. Camille turned back to the mirror, adjusting a strand of hair that had fallen slightly out of place. Everything was under control. Everything was always under control. She had spent decades building walls around herself, and today, those walls would become permanent, fortified by a marriage that made sense on paper and in spreadsheets. But as she smoothed the fabric of her gown, a memory surfaced uninvited. Margaret Chen, her former assistant, standing in this very room 6 months ago with tears in her eyes. "Something's wrong with him, Camille. Preston is too perfect. Don't you find that strange? The way he always says exactly what you want to hear, the way he never disagrees with anything you say. Real people have opinions. Real people push back." Camille had fired her the next day, not for the warning itself, but for the presumption that Camille Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies, could be fooled by anyone. She had called it insubordination. She had called it a boundary violation. But standing here now, in the silence between preparations, she wondered if she had simply called it what she needed to call it to avoid hearing the truth. The thought passed quickly. Margaret had been wrong. Margaret had always been too emotional, too invested in things that didn't concern her. Camille pushed the memory aside and focused on what mattered. In 4 hours, she would be Mrs. Preston Hale, and all of this doubt would disappear. 3 days before the wedding, Wesley Crane sat in the black Lincoln Town car parked in the underground garage of the Ashford estate. The engine was off, but he kept the air conditioning running, a habit he had developed during the long hours of waiting that defined his job. On his phone screen, a photo of his daughter smiled back at him. Juniper, or Junie as everyone called her, was 7 years old with her mother's curly hair and his stubborn chin. She was wearing a paper crown she had made at school, her grin revealing the gap where her front tooth used to be. He had taken the photo 3 weeks ago, right after her latest checkup at the pulmonologist. The news had been cautiously optimistic. Her asthma was stable, manageable with the right medications and regular monitoring. But manageable came with a price tag that kept Wesley awake most nights, calculating numbers that never quite added up. He had been the Ashford family driver for 3 years now, ever since his wife had walked out and left him with a toddler and a stack of medical bills. The job wasn't glamorous, but it came with something no other position could offer: comprehensive health insurance that covered Junie's specialists, her medications, her emergency room visits, when her breathing turned to wheezing in the middle of the night. He had traded his pride for his daughter's lungs, and he would do it again without hesitation. The Ashfords barely noticed him. To them, he was furniture that happened to drive, a silent presence that appeared when needed and vanished when not. Camille had never once asked his name, though he had driven her to hundreds of meetings, airports, and dinner parties over the years. He didn't mind. Invisibility was a small price to pay for Junie's next breath. Every morning when he dropped her off at school and watched her run toward the building with her backpack bouncing, he reminded himself why he did this, why he swallowed his pride and said, "Yes, ma'am," and "right away," to people who never looked him in the eye. The sound of footsteps echoed through the garage, and Wesley straightened in his seat. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Preston Hale approaching, phone pressed to his ear, completely unaware that anyone else was present. Wesley's hand moved toward the ignition, ready to start the car if needed, but Preston stopped about 20 feet away, leaning against a concrete pillar, with the casual confidence of a man who believed he was always alone when it mattered. His voice carried in the empty space, bouncing off walls and finding Wesley's ears with uncomfortable clarity. No, she doesn't suspect anything. Camille's too arrogant to see what's right in front of her. A pause. Laughter. Low and cruel. The prenup has a loophole the size of Montana. My lawyer found it last week. 6 months of marriage, then I file for emotional distress. Half her company, easy. Maybe more if I play it right. Another pause. Of course I'll miss you, Brooke. But think about what we'll have after. 100 million reasons to be patient. Wesley's blood turned to ice. He sat frozen, afraid to breathe, afraid that any movement would alert Preston to his presence. The conversation continued for another 2 minutes, each word landing like a hammer blow. Preston talked about asset transfers, offshore accounts, a clean exit strategy. He talked about Camille like she was a mark, a target, a stepping stone to wealth he hadn't earned. He laughed about how easy she had made it, how her pride had blinded her to everything obvious. And through it all, Wesley thought about Junie, about the insurance card in his wallet, about what would happen if he lost this job. He thought about staying silent, about pretending he had heard nothing, about protecting the one thing that stood between his daughter and a hospital bill that would destroy them both. The phone call ended. Preston walked away, whistling something cheerful. Wesley sat in the car for another hour, staring at Junie's photo, feeling the weight of a choice he wasn't sure he could make. His hands trembled against the steering wheel. For the first time in years, he didn't know what the right answer was. The night before the wedding, Wesley couldn't sleep. He lay on the narrow bed in his apartment, listening to Junie's breathing through the thin wall that separated their rooms. She had been restless earlier, coughing in her sleep, and he had checked on her 3 times before finally convincing himself that she was fine. The inhaler was on her nightstand. The nebulizer was charged. The emergency number for her doctor was programmed into his phone. He had done everything right, everything a father was supposed to do. But now, in the darkness, he found himself thinking about another kind of right, a different obligation that had nothing to do with blood or medicine. He thought about Camille Ashford walking down the aisle toward a man who saw her as nothing more than a transaction. He thought about how she had never looked at him, never acknowledged his existence, never said, "Thank you," or "please," or even "hello." He thought about how easy it would be to say nothing and let her discover the truth on her own, months or years from now, when the damage was already done. Around 2 in the morning, Junie appeared in his doorway, clutching the stuffed elephant she had named Gerald. "Daddy? I had a bad dream." Wesley lifted the covers, and she climbed in beside him, her small body warm against his side. "What was it about?" he asked, wrapping his arm around her. She was quiet for a moment, her breathing still slightly wheezy from the coughing earlier. A princess was going to marry a monster, but she didn't know he was a monster because he was wearing a prince costume. He had a really good disguise. Wesley felt something tighten in his chest. What happened to the princess? Junie yawned. "I don't know. I woke up before the end. But I hope someone told her the truth." She was asleep within minutes, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm that meant her lungs were clear. Wesley stared at the ceiling until dawn, turning a question over in his mind that he already knew the answer to. "Daddy," Junie had asked him last week, while watching a cartoon about talking animals, "is it hard to be a good person?" He had told her no, that being good was easy when you knew what mattered. He had lied. Being good was the hardest thing in the world. But teaching his daughter to be good while choosing silence himself, that was something he couldn't survive. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of perfect weather that seemed designed to mock the chaos brewing beneath the surface. Wesley dressed in his formal driver's uniform, the black suit and white gloves that made him look like a prop in someone else's story. He kissed Junie goodbye, held her a little longer than usual, and left her with her grandmother with a promise to bring back a piece of cake from the fancy wedding. He drove to the Ashford estate with his heart pounding against his ribs, the words he needed to say rehearsing themselves over and over in his head. The plan he had constructed during the sleepless night was barely a plan at all. It was a desperate gamble, a last-minute intervention that could cost him everything. But he kept hearing Junie's voice, kept seeing her face when she asked about being good, and he knew that some lessons couldn't be taught with words alone. He parked in his usual spot and waited for his moment, watching the clock on the dashboard count down the minutes to Camille's scheduled departure for the church. She appeared at exactly 9:15, a vision in white that even Wesley had to admit was stunning. 2 bridesmaids flanked her, adjusting her train, while the wedding coordinator barked orders into a headset. Wesley stepped out of the car and opened the rear door, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Camille approached without glancing at him, her mind clearly elsewhere, already rehearsing her vows or calculating the social dynamics of the reception. She was 1 step from the car when Wesley spoke, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Ms. Ashford, I need to tell you something about Mr. Hale." Camille's eyes finally met his, and he saw the flash of irritation that he had expected. "Not now," she said. "Whatever it is, it can wait until after the ceremony." Wesley didn't move. "It can't. 3 days ago, I overheard him on the phone in the garage. He's planning to divorce you after 6 months and take half your company. There's a woman named Brooke. They've been together the whole time. This marriage is a con. The words hung in the air between them. Camille's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a crack in the armor she wore like a second skin. "That's absurd," she said, her voice cold. "You're fired. Collect your things and leave the property immediately." Wesley had expected this too. "I know," he said, "but I'm telling you the truth, and somewhere inside, you know it too, because you've heard it before. Someone else warned you about him, didn't they? Someone you trusted. And you didn't listen." Camille's face went pale. Margaret. He was talking about Margaret, the assistant she had fired for, saying almost exactly the same thing, using almost exactly the same words. The memory hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She wanted to dismiss Wesley the same way she had dismissed Margaret, wanted to climb into the car and drive to her wedding and pretend this conversation had never happened. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way Wesley looked at her, without judgment or expectation, just a quiet certainty that made her question her own. Maybe it was the fact that two completely different people, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, had tried to tell her the same truth. Or maybe it was the voice in her own head, the one she had been silencing for months, finally breaking through the wall she had built. "How can I know for sure?" she whispered. Wesley reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I didn't record anything. I didn't have proof. I didn't even think about it until it was too late. But right now, Preston is in the garden behind the guest house with a woman who isn't you. I saw them arrive 20 minutes ago. If you hide in the trunk of this car, I can drive around back without being noticed. You'll hear everything yourself. And then you'll know." Camille stared at him. "The trunk?" Wesley nodded. "It's the only way to get close without being seen. The windows back there face the parking area where I always wait. They won't think twice about the car being there. They'll talk freely. And you'll hear exactly who Preston Hale really is." It was insane. It was beneath her dignity. It was the kind of thing that happened in bad movies, not in the life of a woman who controlled boardrooms and commanded respect. But Camille looked at Wesley Crane, really looked at him for the first time in 3 years, and she saw something she hadn't expected. A man with nothing to gain and everything to lose, offering her the truth anyway. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk your job for this? You have a daughter. I've seen her picture in your car. What happens to her if I fire you?" Wesley thought about Junie, about the insurance, about the bills that would bury him if this went wrong. "Because my daughter asked me if it's hard to be a good person," he said, "and I couldn't look her in the eye and tell her yes while choosing to stay silent about this. Some things matter more than safety. Some things matter more than money. If I teach her to be honest, but I'm not honest myself, then I'm not teaching her anything at all." Camille felt something shift inside her. A recognition of the kind of integrity she had forgotten existed. She looked at the car, at the trunk, at the insane choice she was about to make. Then she gathered her $40,000 dress in her hands and nodded. "Open it." The trunk was dark, cramped, and smelled like motor oil and old leather. Camille lay curled on her side, her wedding dress bunched around her like a cloud of crushed dreams, the pearls pressing into her skin through the thin fabric. She felt ridiculous. She felt terrified. She felt, for the first time in years, completely out of control. The car moved slowly, and she heard Wesley's voice through the partition. Calm and steady. "Almost there. Stay quiet." Then the engine cut off, and silence fell like a weight. She waited, counting heartbeats, trying to remember how to breathe in the confined space that seemed to shrink with every passing second. And then she heard it. Preston's voice, so close it seemed like he was standing right next to her, separated only by the thin metal of the car's body. "I told you, everything's under control. She's probably already at the church by now, practicing her perfect smile for the photographers." A woman laughed, warm and intimate. "You're terrible." Preston's voice dropped to something private. something Camille had heard directed at her 1,000 times. "I'm practical. There's a difference. 6 months of playing the devoted husband, and then we're free. Brooke, baby, you know I love you." This was always about us. She was just the means to an end. Camille pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from making a sound. The voices continued, casual and confident, discussing details that made her stomach turn. Preston talked about the prenup, about the clause his lawyer had found, about how Camille was too arrogant to have it reviewed by anyone except her own team of yes men. "She fired her assistant for warning her about me," he laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the quiet morning air. Can you believe that? The one person who actually saw through the act, and Camille got rid of her herself. She did my work for me. I didn't even have to lift a finger. The woman, Brooke, made a sympathetic noise that dripped with mockery. "Poor thing. She really has no idea what's coming." Preston's voice hardened. "She's not poor anything. She's a cold, controlling machine who thinks she's better than everyone. I'm just giving her what she deserves, a lesson in humility." Camille felt tears running down her face, hot and silent, soaking into the satin beneath her cheek. But they weren't tears of heartbreak, not entirely. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing herself through someone else's eyes and understanding that the image wasn't entirely wrong. She had been cold. She had been controlling. She had fired Margaret not because Margaret was wrong, but because Camille couldn't stand the possibility that she might be right. This was her fault. Not Preston's betrayal. That was his own poison. But the blindness that had let him get this close, that was hers alone. The conversation outside continued for another 10 minutes. Each revelation worse than the last. Preston and Brooke discussed offshore accounts, shell companies, the timeline for the divorce filing. They talked about where they would live after everything was finalized, how they would spend the money, whether they should wait for Camille to have an accident or simply humiliate her with a public scandal that would destroy her reputation. "The beauty of it," Preston said, his voice carrying clearly through the trunk, "is that she'll never see it coming. Camille Ashford, the genius who couldn't recognize a con man when she was sleeping next to one. It's almost poetic." Finally, mercifully, the voices faded. Footsteps retreated. A door closed somewhere in the distance. Wesley's voice came through the partition again. "They're gone. I'm opening the trunk." Light flooded in, blinding after the darkness, and Camille sat up slowly, her dress stained with dust and tears. Wesley stood beside the car, his face carefully neutral, giving her the space to fall apart or pull herself together without judgment. She chose the latter. She always chose the latter. But this time, it felt different. This time, the control wasn't a wall to hide behind. It was a tool to wield against the man who had tried to destroy her. "Take me to the church," she said. Wesley hesitated. "Ms. Ashford, you don't have to go through with anything. We can leave right now. Go somewhere else. Figure out the next steps when you're ready." Camille cut him off with a look. "I know what I heard. I know what I need to do. But I'm not running away in a trunk. I'm walking into that church, and I'm ending this on my terms." Preston Hale doesn't get to slink away quietly. He gets to be exposed for exactly what he is, in front of everyone who matters. She climbed out of the car, brushing off her gown with hands that had stopped trembling. "And Wesley, thank you for everything you risked to tell me the truth. I know what it cost you to do this, and I won't forget it." Wesley nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. He held the door open for her, and she slid into the back seat like the queen she had always pretended to be. But now, for the first time, she understood what real power looked like. It wasn't about controlling others. It was about being honest with yourself, no matter how much that honesty hurt. The church was magnificent. a historic cathedral that had hosted society weddings for over a century. 500 guests filled the pews, a who's who of business leaders, politicians, and old money families who had gathered to witness the union of two dynasties. Preston stood at the altar, handsome and confident, his smile the same one that had charmed Camille into believing she had finally found someone who understood her. The organ began to play, and every head turned toward the entrance. Camille appeared in the doorway, her gown glowing in the afternoon light, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was beautiful. She was radiant. She was walking toward her future with steps so measured they could have been choreographed. Preston's smile widened as she approached, not noticing the dust on her train or the strange calm in her eyes. He had no idea that the woman he was watching had spent the last hour curled in a trunk, listening to his plans unravel. He reached for her hand as she arrived at the altar, and she let him take it, her fingers cool against his palm. The ceremony proceeded with all the pomp and circumstance that money could buy. Readings from poets and prophets, hymns that soared to the vaulted ceiling, prayers for the happy couple that echoed off stone walls. Camille stood beside Preston, her face a mask of serenity, waiting for the moment she knew was coming. Her heart beat steadily, her breathing calm. She had made her decision in the trunk, in the darkness, with tears running down her face and the truth burning in her ears. She would not let Preston Hale walk away from this unscathed. Finally, the officiant reached the words that everyone expected to be a formality. If anyone here knows a reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. The silence stretched for exactly 3 seconds. Then Camille raised her hand. I do. The gasps that followed were almost comical. Preston's face went through a series of expressions, confusion, disbelief, and finally fear, as Camille turned to face the congregation. 6 months ago, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral, my assistant tried to warn me about this man. I fired her for it. I was too proud to believe that I could be fooled, too arrogant to consider that someone who cared about me might see something I couldn't. She paused, letting the words sink in. This morning, another person risked everything to tell me the same truth. A driver. A man I had never once acknowledged by name in 3 years of service. He could have stayed silent. He could have protected his job, his daughter's health insurance, his entire life. But he chose honesty over safety. And I finally chose to listen. Preston's face had gone white. Camille, what are you doing? This is insane. Whatever you think you heard. She turned to him with a smile that held no warmth. I know about Brooke. I know about the prenup loophole your lawyer found. I know about the offshore accounts, and the 6-month timeline, and the clean exit strategy. I heard it all, Preston. Every word. Because 30 minutes ago, I was hiding in the trunk of a car, while you told your girlfriend exactly how you planned to destroy me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Camille raised her voice again, addressing the crowd. I wanted all of you here because you deserve to see the man Preston Hale really is, not a devoted partner, but a con artist who saw me as nothing more than a transaction. Not a loving fiancé, but a predator who laughed about my trust with his real partner. She looked around the room at the shocked faces, the dropped jaws, the phones that were already recording. I could have canceled this wedding quietly. I could have saved his reputation and my own pride. But I decided that the truth matters more than comfort. I decided that the people in this room deserve to know who they've been doing business with, who they've been inviting into their homes and their offices and their lives. She removed the engagement ring from her finger and placed it in Preston's frozen hand. I hope whoever you find next is smart enough to do what I didn't. Listen when someone tries to warn her. Listen when the truth is offered, even if it hurts. She turned and walked back down the aisle, her heels clicking against the marble floor, 500 stunned faces watching her leave. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The steps outside the church were cold beneath the thin soles of her wedding shoes. Camille sat down on the top stair, her ruined dress pooling around her like spilled milk, and for the first time all day, she let herself breathe. The doors behind her had closed, muffling the chaos inside. She could hear raised voices, Preston's desperate denials, the shocked murmurs of guests who had expected champagne and were getting confession instead. She should have felt triumphant. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she just felt tired, hollowed out by the effort of maintaining control for so long. A presence settled beside her. Wesley, still in his driver's uniform, sat down on the step without asking permission. They stayed like that for a while, two people who had nothing in common except the truth they had shared, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the church courtyard. "You didn't have to do that," Wesley said finally. "Mention me, I mean, in front of everyone. You could have kept it simple." Camille almost laughed. "You risked your job, your daughter's health care, everything you had to warn me. The least I can do is make sure everyone knows there are still people in this world who choose honesty, even when it costs them." She looked at him properly, this man she had ignored for 3 years, and wondered how many other people she had overlooked in her rush to build an empire. "Why did you do it? Really? Not the answer you gave me before. The whole truth." Wesley was quiet for a moment. "My wife left when Uni was 3. Just walked out one morning, said she couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't handle the medical bills and the sleepless nights, and the fear that every cough might be the one that wouldn't stop. I spent a long time being angry about that. Then I spent a long time being afraid, just trying to survive, keeping my head down, doing whatever it took to make sure Uni had what she needed." He paused, looking at his hands. "But last night, she asked me if it was hard to be a good person, and I realized I had been so focused on keeping her alive that I forgot to teach her how to live." What kind of father tells his daughter to be honest if he stays silent when it matters? Camille felt something crack inside her, a wall she hadn't known she was still defending. "I fired someone for telling me what you told me. Margaret. She was my assistant for 4 years, and I threw her away because I didn't want to hear the truth." Wesley nodded slowly. "I know. Preston mentioned her. When I was listening in the garage, he laughed about it." The shame of it burned through Camille's chest. "I was so sure I knew everything, so convinced that no one could see what I couldn't. I built walls around myself and called them standards." She looked down at her hands, still wearing the manicure she had gotten for the wedding photos. "I'm going to find her. Margaret. I'm going to apologize and ask her to come back." Wesley didn't respond, but something in his silence felt like approval. They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, two strangers who had become something else. Not quite friends, but no longer invisible to each other. A car pulled up to the curb, and an elderly woman stepped out, helping a small girl from the back seat. Junie spotted her father and broke into a run, her curly hair bouncing with each step, a paper tiara perched crookedly on her head. "Daddy!" She launched herself into Wesley's arms, and he caught her with the ease of long practice, pulling her close like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Camille watched the reunion with a strange ache in her chest, something that felt almost like envy. She had spent so long building something impressive that she had forgotten to build something real. Zuni noticed her and stopped squirming, her eyes wide as she took in the wedding dress. "Are you a princess?" Camille smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed all day. "I was supposed to be. But it turns out the prince was actually a dragon in disguise." Junie considered this with the gravity of a 7-year-old philosopher. "Did you slay him?" Camille thought about Preston's face as she walked away, the shock and humiliation that would follow him for years. Something like that. Uni climbed off her father's lap and sat down beside Camille, uninvited, but somehow welcome. "Your dress is really dirty," she observed. "You should probably wash it." Camille looked down at the stains from the trunk, the dust and oil that had ruined thousands of dollars worth of silk and lace. "You know what? I don't think I want to keep it." Uni's eyes lit up. "Can I have the sparkly parts? The shiny things on the front?" Wesley started to apologize, but Camille held up her hand. "Actually, yes. You can have all the sparkly parts. I'll have someone take them off and send them to you. You can make something beautiful with them." Uni beamed. Then her expression turned serious, the way children's faces do when they're about to say something important. "My daddy said you were sad because someone lied to you. I'm sorry that happened. Lying is really bad. It hurts people." Camille felt tears prick at her eyes again, but these were different, softer somehow. "It is bad, but sometimes good people tell the truth even when it's scary. Your daddy did that for me today." Uni looked at Wesley with obvious pride. "My daddy's the best." Wesley's face flushed, but Camille saw the way he held his daughter a little tighter, the way his eyes glistened in the fading light. Camille reached up and removed the tiara from her own head, the custom piece that had cost more than Wesley probably made in a month. It was delicate, encrusted with tiny diamonds, completely impractical for a 7-year-old. She didn't care. She placed it gently on Uni's paper crown, watching the girl's face transform with wonder. "Real princesses don't need crowns," she said, "but sometimes it's nice to have one anyway." Uni touched the tiara with reverent fingers. "Is this really for me?" Camille nodded. "For being raised by someone brave enough to do the right thing." She stood up, brushing off her dress one final time, and looked at Wesley. "I meant what I said inside. I won't forget what you did, and I'll make sure you don't lose anything because of it." Wesley shook his head. "I didn't do it for a reward. I didn't do it for anything except being able to look at my daughter without feeling like a fraud." Camille smiled. "I know. That's exactly why you're getting one." 3 months later, Wesley received a letter in the mail. It was written on heavy cream paper, the kind that rich people used for important correspondence, with the Ashford Technologies logo embossed in the corner. He opened it at the kitchen table while Uni ate her cereal, expecting some kind of formal thank you note that he could frame and forget. Instead, he found details about a full scholarship to one of the best private schools in the city, a school with a renowned program for children with chronic health conditions, including an on-site medical team and air quality systems designed for students with respiratory issues. The letter included a personal note from Camille. "For Uni, who reminded me what real courage looks like, and for you, who taught me that some people are worth seeing. This isn't charity. It's the beginning of paying back a debt I can never fully repay. I've also reinstated Margaret and apologized for my arrogance. She wanted you to know that sometimes the truth takes time to be heard, but it always matters. Thank you for not giving up on it." Wesley read the letter twice, then a third time, his vision blurring. Uni looked up from her cereal. "Daddy, why are you crying?" He wiped his eyes and pulled her into a hug. "Because sometimes good things happen to good people," he said. "And I want you to remember that, okay? No matter how hard it gets, being honest and kind is always worth it." That evening, after Uni was in bed, Wesley sat in the small living room of their apartment, looking at the scholarship papers spread across the coffee table. On the refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a sunflower, was Juni's latest drawing. She had made it the day after the wedding, using every crayon in the box. It showed a princess in a sparkly dress standing next to a man in a black suit, with a small girl between them wearing a crown. At the bottom, in wobbly 7-year-old handwriting, she had written, "The driver and the princess." Wesley had asked her what the picture was about, and she had explained with perfect certainty. It's about how Daddy saved the princess from the dragon, and now they're all friends. And the princess gave me her crown because I asked a really good question. He hadn't corrected her. He hadn't told her that real life was more complicated than fairy tales, that he had spent 3 days terrified of losing everything, that the happy ending had cost him sleep and security and peace of mind. Instead, he had put the drawing on the refrigerator and told her it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Because in a way, it was. Not because it was accurate, but because it was true. Sometimes the driver does save the princess. Sometimes the truth does matter more than comfort. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, being good isn't hard at all. It's just the only choice that lets you look your daughter in the eye and tell her that the world can be better than it is. Wesley turned off the light and went to check on Uni one more time, listening to her steady breathing in the darkness, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Hope